What we're going to make today is challah. This recipe is one that I have adapted from Cooks Illustrated. Um, and oh, Peter, let Valerie in.
Cheers.
Okay, fantastic. Um, for those of you who just joined us, I put the recipe in the chat. I'll put it in the chat again at the end because I know that if you come late, the chat doesn't it's not retroactive.
It didn't show up anyway.
Okay. All right. Well, it shows up on my side, but we'll do it again later. And if anybody wants, I'm happy to email it to you. It's not a state secret or anything like that. This recipe, as I was saying before, is something I adapted from Cooks Illustrated. I continue to tweak it as I go along. How many people saw the documentary Jiro Loves Sushi? People seen it? Yes. Okay. Fantastic. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. But it's this, 70-year-old guy, and all he's done for his entire life is make sushi. And you watch him, what he puts his apprentices through just to make rice, and you're like, that's nuts. But there's something about the idea of if you keep doing something over and over and over again, you get a little bit better at it because you start to understand the permutations of what you're working with. And I have found that to be true in working with yeast because depending on the weather, and 18 other variables, it's a little different every time. I do this every week. So over the years, it's sort of come to me, I'm like, oh, I see where it's going now, and I can start to react to it. We'll start off with our basic ingredients. I have a KitchenAid. It's a nice, it's just sitting. You can see it sitting over there in its little niche. So it's a KitchenAid. What is this beast? This is a Professional 5. It's a few years old, but it's a great workhorse machine. I highly recommend them. I highly recommend stand mixers unless you're looking for a full aerobic workout every time you make dough.
I'm going to shut it. I'm going to leave.
So,
no, I want to think about my baby.
All right. The second thing I highly suggest you have is a food scale. This one's from Target. It probably cost me all of $15. It does both metric and imperial. There you go. Food scale.
Okay.
All on food scale. There's a tare button that basically zeroes it out so you don't have to factor in the weight of the bowl. All-purpose flour. You might say to yourself, why is he weighing his flour? You should always weigh your flour. If you talk to professional bakers, they only ever weigh the flour. They never measure the flour. And this is because depending on the level of compaction of the flour, the humidity, and a couple of other variables, it will change. So the way you get a more consistent use of flour is to weigh it. So what we want is a pound of flour. I get about 3.5 ounces in a scoop here. Already spilling things. I buy all-purpose flour at Costco. It's organic. I don't think that really makes a difference. Somebody will inevitably ask me, hey, can I use bread flour? You can. Bread flour will give you stronger gluten formation, and that will give you, it will change the dough. So the more gluten, the more elastic the dough will become. Generally speaking, for things like pizza, you want really high gluten flour. If you're making a cake, on the other hand, you want really low gluten flour because really chewy cake doesn't sound appealing to anybody. So I use all-purpose flour. I find that the gluten content of this, or the protein content, is within the parameters I want in terms of the challah at the end isn't too chewy, but it has enough body to it that it lifts nicely. Because the other thing the gluten does, of course, is it creates the pockets inside the dough that then result in the rise. So if you're having really dense, if you've tried making challah and it's just really dense and you're like, wow, this would make a better, doorstop than a bread. That's just a function of the rise of the dough. Get that out of the way. All right. To this, we will add, turn that off. All right, next step is, this is half a cup of warm water. How warm, you say? I use tap water. It is 93 degrees. This is an instant read thermometer. You get these at a hardware store. 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Of course, for those of you who have raised children, you might remember how you checked the bath water temperature, right? You stuck your elbow in it, and if it didn't feel like uncomfortably hot on your elbow, you were good to go. So it's the same thing. This is dry yeast. It's the same stuff that you buy, in the baking aisle that comes in the little packets. It's 2 teaspoons. Exactly how much yeast, like it's a little light, it's a little high, it doesn't really matter. About 2 teaspoons. We're just going to sprinkle that on top here and let that do its thing. We'll move that to the side for the moment. All right, the other things you will need. This
Could you show
is
that one more time? What you just did?
Yep. So this is the yeast. And here, I'll just hold that up to the other camera so you can see what it looks like floating on top of the water. Good? Excellent. All right. Other things you will need. White sugar, 1/3 of a cup. This just goes right in with your flour. Thus. This is melted butter. You want to melt it, and then you want to let it cool back down to room temperature. So the first thing they will tell you in baking is you should always use sweet butter. You should never use salted butter. I, on the other hand, always buy salted butter because, when I buy sweet butter, my kids go, "Hey, who took the salt out of the butter?" So when you use salted butter, you should omit the salt from the recipe. If you're using sweet butter, then you have to add some salt back in. Make sense? Questions? No? Okay, you guys are making this easy.
How much butter?
How much butter? That's an excellent question. Thank you very much. It's 2 ounces of butter, which is a half a stick of butter. So you can either weigh that, or you can just get a standard, 4-ounce stick out and slice that sucker in half, and you're good to go.
I have a question.
Yes.
Actually, 2 questions. One is with the yeast. So you, by not mixing it, it makes it become alive more. Is that?
No, I mean, it's, you can do either. You can whisk it in, you can mix it in with a teaspoon. Any of those things are perfectly fine. My habit is just to sprinkle it on top. I think in part it comes from, I used to be nervous about whether or not the yeast was still good. And I knew that if I just sprinkled it on top and it slowly percolated into the water, I could see the degree to which it was perking up. And as opposed to if you all mix it together, you're just sort of looking at it and you're like, yeah, that just looks like, tan water. And then it's sort of harder to judge what's going on.
And do you ever add a little bit of sugar to activate it?
No, because one of the things I learned, I had a friend one time, oh God, this is decades ago, and her brother worked for Red Star Yeast, and they're based in Milwaukee, and where they were, and he said to me that each one of those little yeast pellets is actually coated with a little bit of sugar. So it doesn't really need, it has everything it needs to get started. It's like a little seed packet. It comes with its own food. Is that the endosperm? I can't remember. High school biology? Yeah, so far behind me now.
I have one last question. So I'm sorry to dominate.
No. This is why we're doing this, so you can ask questions.
The question about using butter versus oil, especially within the Jewish.
Right. So I am decidedly a non-halachic Jew. And at the end of the day, I think butter tastes better. Butter.
Agreed.
Nobody's ever gone, cooking oil, right? Like that's not a phrase you've ever heard before. Usually you go, oily. So I prefer that. If you want to go fully in the other direction, try using chicken fat. You know, schmaltz. See, that sounds good. Wesson? No, that, sorry.
You could have it with a Fleischig meal.
And you could have it with a Fleischig meal, right? So if you are eating meat and that's something you care about, I mean you can use other fats. I would steer clear of things like lard or shortening. I've never played with them, and I find like if I eat something that's been made with cooking oil, like if I eat challah made with cooking oil, I can tell. I'm like that it's missing that butteriness.
I'm sure you could try any permutation. Like I'm sure you get good results with coconut oil, or maybe some kind of avocado oil or olive.
Yeah. I mean, olive oil might be interesting. I mean, really, it's a little bit of fat. We're also going to add eggs, so that'll up the fat content as well. So yeah. Other questions? Just watching my yeast here. Really? That easy? Okay.
Let's move on.
Okay, fantastic. What did I do with my wooden spoon? I had it like 10 seconds ago, just wandering out of the frame. Oh yeah, I put it away. See, I'm just a little too organized for my own good. A wooden spoon is a beautiful thing. You probably don't need more than one, but I have one. So I'm just gonna, I'm just mixing the butter in here. And now, eggs, 2 eggs. These are large eggs. They come from Costco. They're cage-free. I get everything at Costco if you haven't figured that out yet. There we go. 2 eggs. Wipes hands on apron. Break the yolks up. If you were feeling really pretty, you could scramble these in advance, but it doesn't really matter. And then we're just going to work that together. And what you will end up with is, for those of you who have ever made a pie crust, is something that looks very familiar. This will start to look like pie crust. And you can sort of see the, I'm like trying to figure out which way to tip it so you can see it. So what you'll get in the end is, you can see, right, for those of you, people who've made pie crust, somebody nod their head like, oh yeah, I made pie crust, right? And this is what you're aiming for, is like that sort of crumbly texture to it. Now you have a choice at this point. You can let this sit for a little bit, or immediately add water. And the basic difference is, the longer this sits with the fat in it, the more of the starch will be saturated with fat, as opposed to when you introduce the water. And the change you have is in the rapidity of gluten formation, like how much of that strand you'll get. So depending on, I would say, make it once or twice, make a decision like, oh, I really wish it had like a, the crumb was a little more open. It's like a little too dense, then add the water more quickly. If on the other hand you're like, this is really chewy, like this is like eating baguette, then let it sit with the fat longer. I keep buying the same brand of flour over and over and over again, so that helps me in sort of understanding exactly where I am. I just dump the water in pretty quick, but it may be different for you. All right, so this is now what our water looks like. And as you can see, a lot of the yeast, can you see that? And we can even zoom in. Look at that. We're fancy. So what you can see is the yeast now has gone from sort of a layer on top to almost sort of like a shaggy mat. It's almost like algae, right, that forms in a puddle. And if you smelled this right now, it would smell a little like beer. Particularly, it would smell like a Weiss beer, a Hackershore Weiss, into which you might want to put a large slice of lemon. And it should be served very cold and very crisp on a hot day. Having said all that, it has a beery smell to it, which is no surprise, because what's the magical ingredient in beer? Yeast.
Yeast.
Yeast. There you go. So I'm going to pull this back out a little bit. All right. So we'll give that a little shake just to make sure everything's in there. We'll give it a little swirl just to get everything off the sides. Leave no yeast behind. I'm being sort of unnecessary here, but all right. This is going on to the stand mixer, which I'm not going to make you sit through right now, but generally I'll leave this on the stand mixer for around 5 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes. And what I'm looking for is uniformity, so that when you look at it, and you may have to peel it, you use the dough hook, which is this guy. And what you want is a dough that looks uniform in its consistency. When you first start to mix this up, you're going to think, oh, that's dry. That needs more water. Resist that urge. It just takes a while to come together. These liquid measurements are pretty spot on, and you shouldn't need to add any more liquid.
Gordon, would you mind just hand kneading that for those of us who don't have a hand mixer? I mean, auto mixer.
Sure.
That was my next question. What do you think of dough whisks? There's this Danish dough whisk I've been looking at because I don't have the counter space. I have enough counter space for other things, but I don't have extra counter space for.
I have never in my life even seen such a thing, so I couldn't even offer you an opinion on that.
Okay.
You know, but if you watch, you know, the British, you know, baking show, they do a lot of hand kneading. God bless them. They are just gluttons for punishment.
I hand kneaded mine yesterday just because I didn't want to. I don't know if I used a dough hook. It didn't look like that. I have to go look and see if I have that. And it was actually pretty easy, and it didn't take long at all for it to come together.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take long to come together. There's a little bit of magic that happens, you know, as you continue to knead it. So typically your stand mixer comes with 3 different attachments. Just pull these out. So you've got, there we go, whisk, paddle, hook. Some of the hooks now look more like spirals. This is an older model. I've had it a while.
Can you zoom in on that? I can't see them from the distance.
Is that good?
Well, actually, you know what I'll do is I'll try gallery view. Hang on a second.
This is, all right, so this is the whisk.
Yeah, that's fine. Good.
Okay. Oops, that's the paddle. This is, so whisk is great for things like meringues, whipped cream, that kind of stuff. Paddle, if you're making cakes, pancake batter, waffle batter, and what have you. This is an excellent choice. But if you're making dough, you really want the dough hook, and you really want the dough hook because it just takes physically a fair bit. I'm just going to pull this up a little bit. Here we go. You know, it takes physically a fair bit of torque. The better KitchenAids have more torque. Mine's a lift bowl model, as opposed to the ones that tip. The lift bowl models have more torque. The motors are bigger, and they just, you know, deliver more oomph. Of course, with that oomph comes a little bit of a safety hazard, is that it has enough torque to take your fingers off. So you definitely want to keep your hands out of it.
Gordon, we cannot see the counter.
Let's see. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Peter.
There you go. And Gordon,
So,
is there a setting on the mixer that you would recommend?
the lowest setting is the one to go with. So
When you
And Gordon, I'm one of those people that likes to knead it because, quite frankly, it's been my therapy this past few months. I just love it. And I was told that you should knead it at least about 10 minutes.
yeah, I think if you're hand kneading, that's probably a reasonable marker. You know, it's right. So you can see right now it's still crumbly, right? So as I peel this, you can see it's just breaking up like this.
Gordon, mine was sticky yesterday.
Right. So different recipes are going to have different liquid contents. This one runs a little on the drier side, and it's easier to handle right away. some of them are, as raw as yours might have been, wetter, and you're not going to be able to pick it up and work with it to the same degree.
And what sort of considerations would you make for weather or climate?
So if it's really, it comes into the proofing. So if you have cold weather and the interior of your house then is somewhere, closer to 60 degrees, as opposed to, I think my kitchen right now is creeping up on 80 at the moment, then you're going to have a much different proof time. So it's going to, the warmer it is, the friskier the yeast is going to get.
Gordon, question.
Yes.
If you were to make 2 challahs, do you double the content or you make them separately?
So a stand mixer can probably handle 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of flour, if it's, large enough. Peter, you got to let Valerie in again. She slipped out.
Perfect. So you can make 2 small ones, or you can make 1.
Yeah. So I mean, this will yield a 1 pound loaf, which in the end, I'll show you half of one when we get there. But you may so if you're doing this by hand, I would do it 1 pound at a time, because you're probably not going to want to have to try and muscle a 2 pound loaf around. Like that's, unless you have forearms like Popeye, that is just, that's not going to be fun. So anyway, so if you're hand kneading, the goal is to just keep folding it and pushing it down. And the delightful thing about this is the longer you do it, the harder it will get, because you're forming those protein chains and they're just going to start fighting you. And this is usually the point where I think, you know what? Edison brought electricity into the house and I have a mixer that does this. So.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Great.
Talk to me.
So wondering if you were doing this the electric mixer, would it still be in the mixer at this point?
Yeah.
Would it be out doing this part by?
Yeah, no, it would be in the mixer at this point. So, and I would just let the mixer run, for 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay.
And
mixer replaces
these. Yeah, the mixer will replace all the hand kneading. You don't have to do any hand kneading if you have a mixer.
How heavy is the mixer?
How heavy is it?
Yeah.
Let's see. This one's probably close to 30 pounds, I'd guess.
Oh, and what do you think of bread machines?
I had one years and years and years ago that my father gave me, that he bought out of one of those catalogs where they sold nifty things back in the old days. It wasn't Hanukkah Shlema, but it was one of those kinds of catalogs. And then it just sat around and gathered dust, and he's like, "Hey, you want a bread machine?" I'm like, "Sure." And it was fine. I think the thing with the bread machine, and to use a bread machine for kneading, I think is a perfect use for it, because it will knead and then it will control the temperature inside, so you get a nice proof. But I found baking in it, like, you're just sort of limited to like this little thing. And you got weird loaves and they had weird crust. Now, bread machines could have changed a whole lot since 1989. So they may have gotten much, much better.
Are there alternate methods of proofing that you could use? Like I saw in the Great British Baking Show, they put dough in the freezer sometimes, or in a proofing drawer.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things you can do. So proofing can be done. So there's a couple of different tricks. I tend to proof my dough by, I take this bowl, I put hot water in it, and then, hang on, I've got to get another bowl. I have this bowl that I bought at Target. I have a couple of these, and it has a little lip on it. And it sets up quite nicely inside my mixing bowl. So then I put the dough here, and I put a plate on top of that, so I don't have to use any saran wrap because, save the earth. And it's hot water underneath, and that becomes a nice proofing chamber in my kitchen.
Wait, so how did you heat up the water?
So I just put hot water in here, right?
Just like normal
from the tap.
Yeah.
From the tap. Like the hottest water you can get out of your tap. It's probably 110, 120 degrees at most. Hotter than that, you've got a scalding issue, and you should really call the building superintendent. And then, and you want like just enough water so it doesn't touch the bottom of the second bowl. And I just put it in there like that. And then I put a plate on top, and I leave that, and I leave this on my countertop. I make this in the morning. I leave this on my countertop and go to work. And it just sits there all day. The other thing you can do is if you have an Instapot, yes, that's what it's called, Instapot, right? Those pressure cookers that everybody bought 2 years ago. Everybody nodded their head. They're like, oh yeah, I got one of those for Christmas. Oh wait, wrong crowd. So if you have one of those, it has a yogurt setting on it. And that yogurt setting is exactly the right temperature for yeast and bacteria to grow. Now, you'll see sometimes people put it in the refrigerator overnight. And what that does is it lets it sour. So there's two things growing in your dough. One is yeast that you put there, and the other is bacteria that are there just because they fall out of the air. The bacteria give you sort of a sour, when you eat a bagel and there's like a little bit of a sourness to it, that's a result of a long, slow prove, as the British would say. The device they use is called a retarder. It holds the temperature just a little bit warmer than the refrigerator would be, somewhere like 45 degrees. And it lets all those bacteria build up, but the yeast can't build up at the same rate. The yeast need a warmer, they want it closer to 70, 80 degrees to really do well. So you're sort of changing, the environment for who's growing there. If you do that, then you need to bring the bread back out and you let it come all the way back up to room temperature so the yeast can get to work again. Otherwise, if you baked it straight out of the fridge, it would be a log and it would be probably inedible.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So the recipe that I used, it says let it rise for an hour and a half to 2 hours. Could I leave it longer because I wanted to go do something and then?
Yep.
It doesn't hurt it.
Yep, it does not. You can leave it quite a while. So the longer you leave, you'll see it as if you let it sit for a long time, you'll see it's like balloons up. You can just punch that back down, fold it over on itself a couple of times, and stick it back there. In the course of a day, you will not get to the point, especially with all the added sugar in this recipe, where the yeast has eaten everything there is to eat, right? When they make things like baguette, one of the issues is, especially with sourdough starters, is that they need to be fed. They use up all the available, the yeast eat everything that they can. And then they start to die. And you don't get the kind of perk you want out of it. But a recipe like this, if you let it set all day, it would be fine. Okay,
thanks.
You don't have enough yeast, and there's so much sugar in here. It might get a little boozy if you left it long enough. But
what's the shortest amount of time it can sit?
Until at least doubles in size once, and that's really going to depend on your kitchen's climate.
So, in other words, but like 2 hours to 8 hours, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, you could get it so I've made bread, with a 2 hour proof. It's doable. I find the longer I let it sit, the better the end product is.
So what do you think is the ideal window?
That's a good question. I would say once it's nice and perky, it doesn't probably matter that much. I mean, you're getting a more complex flavor the longer it sits because these bacteria are growing, and that's what sort of separates. What is the difference between white bread and anything that comes from Acme? It's the bacterial growth in the bread. And that's just the amount of time it sits, because, you know, the Wonder Bread just gets shot out of a, you know, a machine, you know, with a whole bunch of, you know, basically they're like yeast hormones, right? Like there's these dough conditioners that really accelerate the rise, so they're not as reliant on the yeast. But the result is it's tasteless, and you think to yourself, it's the same ingredients. Like, how is this, you know, as tasteless as it is, you know? And the guy down the street with a little, you know, boutique bakery, he's also buying flour, water, sugar, yeast, like it's the same stuff, but it tastes radically different. And some of that is a question of how long does it sit. So you can do it in 2 hours. I think, you know, 4 to 6 probably gives you a better loaf. If you know, I'll sometimes let it sit 8 to 10 hours. When I do pizza dough, again, I make that at 6:30 in the morning, and I'm not rolling out that pizza until, God, sometimes 8 at night. And I get a really nice pizza crust out of that. That's a whole different class. You got to sign up. You got to sign up for the series to get the pizza dough.
There you go. Let's talk about flours. You get your flour at Costco. You said, and I think you said all-purpose flour, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about King Arthur flour and all these other flours? What's the story? What do you think is?
I mean, I think they're all good. I mean, you can, what is it? The Gold brand is the stuff you find in the supermarket.
Gold medal.
I can't. Yeah.
Gold medal.
Gold medal. Thank you. King Arthur is also fine. You know, I think
Bob's Red Mill.
Bob's Red Mill, right?
Bob.
So I think really it's a question of, for me, the key thing was consistency. If I was buying the same flour over and over again, I had an idea of what I was working with. I find when I switch, it's not terribly different, but it's a little different. It handles a little differently, and I don't know if that's like the coarseness of the grind or where they source their wheat or something. So yeah, the stuff I buy, I get at Costco. It's like 2 10-pound bags. It's organic. I don't even remember what it's called off the top of my head. I have some somewhere deep in my pantry that's unopened.
Gordon, you have proofed flour, right?
I do, as a matter of fact. Check
it out.
All right, let's move on, shall we? Let me get some of this out of the way. Alton Brown doesn't have these problems because he has stage hands. All right. I made this morning. And this has been punched down a few times. It's got a little bit of a dry crust on it because it's been sitting out for an hour now. But if I did this, you could see how much, right? So before, after, right? So when we talk about doubling in size, it really does get much bigger. And now, if I start to manipulate this, you can see how much smoother and more elastic it is. I don't know how well that's picking up in the resolution of the camera, but can you see the difference?
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. So
are you putting anything else special in your challah for New Year?
What's that? It's the last project that was on this board. So oftentimes people put raisins in. Here we have some sun-made raisins. And if you want to do that, you want to incorporate them at this step rather than later. So first of all, I like to do my challah in a pan. And the reason I like to do it in a pan because I get more vertical lift than if I do it on a sheet pan. All right, so when I've done it on a sheet pan, it just sort of like pushes out sideways and it spreads and it's, you know, sort of low. And, you know, I was frustrated by that. I really wanted to be taller and prettier. So I started doing all my challah in pans. So this is my round, what is this, 8-inch cake pan. When I make it, I'm just wandering off camera here a moment, not at New Year's, I use this loaf pan and I line it with parchment. I really believe, even though this is a nonstick pan, line with parchment, it will make your life so much easier. thing is, you've got egg in here. When egg, cooks, it really wants to adhere to things like metal. Those egg proteins, they're hooks. And if they get their hooks into even in your nonstick metal, it'll be a mess to get it off. So this one is just a round piece of parchment. I've actually used it once already. I'm lazy, I'm not cutting another one. So move that to the side. But you don't have to use a pan. If you just do it on a sheet pan, that's fine. Again, parchment is your friend.
Gordon, you mentioned punching it down. How often do you punch it down? This is while it's proofing?
Generally, I punch it down when I look over at it and I notice that it has pushed the plate up out of the bowl. So, I have like I said, I put a plate on top of the bowl and, I'll look over and I'm like, oh, that's trying to get out of the bowl.
You said you put a plate there, and that was my first thought, was when does that plate fall and break?
Yeah, so it doesn't fall and break. So what happens is the dough rises to the plate. It's a little moist and sticky, so it actually sticks to the plate. I also have, my plates are Corelle, so they're like the glass plate. So they're pretty thin, and they're also fairly bulletproof. But I haven't had one go off the counter yet.
Okay.
Of course, now that you've said that, probably next week.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jinx you.
Yeah, no. It's linoleum flooring, so I'm probably good. Last place I lived, we had sandstone tile flooring, or not sandstone, soapstone, and that stuff was just hell on my dishes.
One last question with the proofing. Do you ever put it in the oven to, not with the oven on, but in
right.
for
I've done that, yeah. So what I'll do, especially in the winter, I have an Instapot now, which I'll use in the wintertime. But before I had that, what I would do is I would put the oven on the lowest setting it'll go to. So for most people, that's somewhere around 170, 180 degrees. And I would wait until it just registered, like it goes from like low to, whatever that first thing it'll register. And I'll shut it off and I'll let it sit for a little bit because it's going to start cooling down again. You don't want it over 140 degrees, right? So if you think about what they teach you in food safety class, right? 40 to 140, that's the danger zone. That's where your yeast grows. And you want the dough to be in the danger zone. So if it's over 140, you're killing the yeast. If it's below 40, you're freezing the yeast. Make sense? Somebody nod their head. Tell me yes.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So we're going to shape dough. I like to do 4-strand braids, whether I'm doing round or traditional. I like 4-strand. It looks nicer than a 3-strand, but it takes a little bit of, for everybody who grew up braiding hair, traditional 3-strand, 4-strand is a little counterintuitive. So this is my Cake Saber. If your mother didn't own a bakery, then you may not own this because you did not get to rummage through the kitchen when she sold the bakery. But I have one and I like it. This is probably available at, what is it? What's the name of that chain?
Sur La Table?
No, I mean, you can get a really fancy one at Sur La Table.
Crate and Barrel?
Nope.
Joann's?
No, they might have them at Joann's.
Joann's has a lot of cake.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's a restaurant supply grocery store.
But that looks like a bread knife. That looks like a basic.
Yeah, I mean, so it's serrated.
Smart and Final?
Smart and Final. Thank you, Peter. So yeah, Smart and Final. If you go into like where they sell all the knives and stuff, like these white handles are a dead giveaway. It's for kitchens. This is, these are designed actually for people who are cutting cakes. Like if you're making layer cakes, these are long enough to saw through the cake and create layers.
And what's it called again?
It's, I don't know. What does it say it is?
Called it a Cake Saber.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably not its real name, but it sounds nice.
Knife,
yeah, it's like a long serrated cake knife. And this is I don't know, about 12 inches. So, yeah, I mean, you could use any knife. I happen to like this one. You know, what I wouldn't do is use this knife. This knife only really wants to be used on, you know, fish and meat, because it's a very delicate blade. Okie doke. Let's shape some dough. Okay, so when I shape my strands, here's my little hack. So for those of you who might remember from kindergarten playing with Play-Doh, how do you roll out like strands of Play-Doh? You go like this, right? And you just like push it out. What we want to do is we want to leave a little bit of the middle intact. So it starts to look a little like a python that's had a good meal. Got it? And we'll do that again. I'm rolling these out. Let's see, this board is about 14 inches wide. So I should tend to roll out to the edge of the board and then it'll spring back a little bit. You see how it comes back? And I find this is good if you're making round or a long challah, either one. So now, if you were going to put raisins or nuts or whatever you want in it at this stage in the game, what I would do is spread these a little bit, all right? And then you would put the raisins right in here, and then you want to just fold it back on itself, okay? Because you really want them inside, because if they're on the outside, they'll just, like if you sprinkle raisins on top of the finished bread before you put it in the oven, you'll end up with wonderfully caramelized raisins that fall off. They won't be part of the bread. But you didn't want to mix them in earlier because then they get like mangled by the mixer, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to take your silence as acquiescence. So I'm going to demonstrate two different braids. So this is for your standard weekday challah. And this is a 4-strand braid. You ready? Okay. I'm left-handed. Let me start there. So this may be completely backwards for you, but the principle should still work. Take the end one. It's going to go over this one. Then it's going to go under that one. And then over the next one. And then you've created like a little weave here, right? Good. And then we're going to do that again. And we're going to pull this one back over here. So once again, I'm in the same position I was, except one knot further down the line. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll do it again. And again. And again. And right until we run out of room. Now, when this proofs up, and you're going to let it sit again until it doubles in size, about an hour, okay? What will happen is the center obviously will get much larger than the tails. If you don't leave these bumps in the middle, what I have found is the tails end up larger, and that is simply because when you're rolling the dough out, you're pushing harder in the center, and you're going to move more dough out to the edges, and then you're going to end up with sort of big bulbs on the edges, and you'll have a saddle-backed bread, which is perfectly fine, but also not particularly attractive. Right? It'll eat the same. You'll just feel a little more self-conscious when you pull it out and put it on the table. Okay. Let's unwind this. And then we'll do a 4-strand round. Because that's what you all came here to see, right? Because it's Rosh Hashanah. All right. So
the other one wasn't round; it was just kind of oval-esque. and how it turns out?
So if you put it in a loaf pan, you'll get a sort of a rectangular loaf. And if you put it on a sheet pan, it'll just be sort of a, like challah looks like, when you get it from Irving's or whomever, right? It'll have that kind of, sort of oval-esque, ovoid, elliptical. I don't know. All right. So we're going to play tic-tac-toe. Oops.
I believe that's now called a hashtag.
Okay. Hashtag, it's challah time. All right, and the tricky bit is to just get these little guys as tightly, like a pile of harbor seals on top of each other, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to work our way around, taking the one that's going over the top and putting it under the one down the line. I'm going clockwise. You can go counterclockwise. I'm a liberal. You can do whatever you want.
Can you do that? Well, never mind. This is recorded, so I'll go back and look at it.
Yeah, I mean, so sure. This is reversible. Okay, so here we are. Hashtag. All right. So this guy is coming over the top of this one, right? We're going to stick it under that one. So now this one goes over, under, over. And then we'll just continue that around. And then we can work back in the other direction. And we'll end up with something like that. And, whoops, where am I here? Here we go. And then if you pull these ends towards each other and give them a little pinch, you will get a round loaf.
Beautiful.
And that get lifted up and plunked into there and left alone for an hour. At the end of that hour, you want to put an egg wash on it. A simple egg wash is 1 yolk, maybe 2 teaspoons to a tablespoon of water, just tap water. Mix that together and then use a pastry brush. You can use a basting brush, doesn't really matter. You can use paintbrush and put it on that. If you want to put poppy seeds, sesame seeds, everything bagel spice, like whatever you're into, jalapenos, that's the moment to put your topping on.
Or sprinkles if you want the Barbie challah.
Or sprinkles if you want the Barbie challah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's not sell the Barbie challah short.
Has Jessica taken your course?
She has not. She had a tutorial with Nancy Sheftel Gomes. And that was sort
doing?
I haven't tasted her challah. Visually, they look good. But, as they say, the proof is in the pudding.
They're
I
delicious.
think I did an egg wash with egg white.
So I've done egg white washes, and what I find is you get better color with the yolk.
Okay.
You get the shine, but you get a really nice color that you don't get with the white. You can also use milk.
And I think Ruth or somebody said on Facebook, one of theirs, they did it with honey. Would that burn?
Because it's Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, you could do it with honey. You could do it with bourbon.
Okay, I'll try it.
Maple syrup.
A nice spiced rum. Maple syrup, yeah. I mean, if you've already got like raisins and nuts in there, why not go with a spiced rum? That could be really lovely. Sorry, go ahead.
The
question.
Oven?
The oven.
So
the wash goes on right before it goes in the oven. That should be the last thing you do. So let it, like this would get to be about double in size. And then you put the wash on with a brush and stick it in the oven. I bake my challah at 400 degrees. I have a convection oven. Every oven is a little bit different. Every oven's idea of 400 degrees is a little bit different. So you may have to play with your oven a little bit. Again, if you want an impartial third-party opinion on how hot your oven really is, an infrared thermometer settles an awful lot of arguments.
Pan of water do you use a pan of water?
So what I do is I throw about a half a cup of water into the oven, onto the floor of the oven, to create steam. It's not necessary. I just started screwing around with that as a technique recently. I like the results that I get. It changes the crust a little bit, which is nice. But I wouldn't recommend it necessarily as a white belt move. I would wait until you get up to at least the, what is it, blue belt, brown belt? A few stages up the ladder.
You're splashing water on the bottom of the oven?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
okay.
Create steam.
Yeah, it creates steam, and this is great side benefit, it cleans the bottom of your oven.
Now, question, what do you think of baking stones?
I used to have a pizza stone, and I found that it didn't do a whole lot for me. I think if you feel like your oven cycles on and off a lot and the temperature isn't staying consistent, oven stones are a great way to stabilize that. But if you have a convection oven, it shouldn't really matter, because the whole point of a convection oven is circulating the air, and you're maintaining a more even temperature. But older ovens, particularly gas ovens, probably benefit from baking stones, because when those ovens come up to temperature, they turn off. And then you've got no heat, and then it's going to wait until it's fallen below that temperature again, wherever the thermostat is, before it kicks in again. So, you'll constantly get this wave of, the temperature.
Wait, so how old are we talking about? I mean, if I have an older oven, I've lived in my apartment for years, then you're saying it's probably shutting off as soon as it gets to 350 or 400 or whatever?
No, Lainey, there's what I found out when I had to buy ovens for my kitchen this 20 years ago, was the difference in price has to do with the standard deviation of the temperature. The narrower the deviation of the temperature, the more you pay for it. And also electric ovens tend to have a smaller deviation in temperature. It's the way it happens. It's got a thermostat. That's what it works.
This is a gas oven.
The gaskets around your door. Because, once, like after a while, if you use your oven a lot, the gaskets around the door might not seal as tightly, and that's going to cause a variation in temperature.
Right. And the other issue you'll run into as time goes on is the oven gets further and further out of calibration. So what that thermostat thinks the temperature is versus what it actually is, right? Commercial ovens are notorious for this, right? So the commercial ovens we have in the Newman kitchen are, they're old gas ovens, and I've had guys come in to work on them, and they say to me like, oh yeah, these things go out of calibration in an hour.
Yeah.
Like you cannot trust the thermostats. You have to use an external thermometer, and whether that, and I think having an instant read thermometer is the best bet, because even those oven thermometers that you hang in there, those are just bimetallic, and their accuracy degrades over time, and it isn't great to begin with.
So can I tell you two things? Is one, I always in the middle turn the pan around, because that helps to kind of alleviate any variations in temperature between the back of the oven and the front of the oven. And then also thumping the bread and hearing the sound tells you a lot. Like I learned how to bake on a fire, 2 tins, and you put the coals from the bottom on the top, and you have to do it all with sight and with your senses.
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. I actually, when I do mine, because I'm working in a pan, so I put it in for 15 minutes, and then at 15 minutes, I pull it out, I take it out of the pan, and I put it right on the rack.
Me too.
And the way I do that, I'll just step out of the frame again. Pizza peel. So, I'll take it off the pan and then put it on the pizza peel and slide it back in, and not with the parchment underneath it anymore. And after 15 minutes, it should come right off that parchment, because it's pretty much par baked at that point. That is my technique, and I also rotated at that moment. So I do 2 runs of 15 minutes at 400 degrees, and at the end of that, as Nancy said, if you flip that puppy over and you tap on the bottom, you should hear it should sound like a drum, and that lets you know the interior is cooked. If you have any doubt and you have a probe thermometer, which let's see, where's mine? Here it is. If you have a probe thermometer, you should get around 200 degrees inside that bread. And that lets you know it's done.
So Gordon, can I ask you, is that 400 degree temperature on your convection? That would be 425 if it weren't a convection, right?
So I set it at 425. You're right. Convection ovens have this funny thing where they discount everything 25 degrees. So I set it at 425 and it knocked it down to 400. I really wanted it at 400. If I put it at 400, it would knock it down to 375, and it's too cold for what I want to do. You know, again, every oven is its own being. And I'm sure even 2 ovens of the same brand, the same age, would have slightly different funkiness to them.
What would you do for a standard, if you've got a gas oven, you're using 425 for the convection, what would you recommend for those of us with gas ovens?
I would start at 400 and see where you end up.
Okay.
And you may find yourself thinking, oh, this is running a little long, or you may find yourself thinking, oh, this is just fine. I'm noticing my oven is still on from a previous project, right? There's nothing in there? No. So.
Do you have a suggestion? Do you have a suggestion for, sometimes I'll do the braid and the bread will rise and it looks beautiful. I put it in the oven and then I pull it out of the oven and the braid's just disappeared. It's, you know, it's now a nice rounded loaf with maybe some creaks.
Right. So probably what happened is you overproofed it. And what will happen is, so if you let this sit long enough, right? So first it's already starting to prove here. And you can see a little bit of cross chatter here. Peter, can you find that? So it'll start to expand and fill the pan. There's a point where you'll look at this and it'll start to look like a balloon that was at a child's birthday party 2 days ago, right? We all know what that looks like, where the balloon is sort of like half deflated. It's a little, like, it doesn't have the firmness that it once had. And what bakers will call that is blown out, right? It's gotten so much gas inside of it, it's started to leak the carbon dioxide out of the dough, and it's starting to deflate. And at that point, pretty much everything is just going to sort of meld together again. And if you turn your back on it and, and you got involved in a project and you're like, oh my God, this it looks like a, melted ice cream, punch it down, work it a little bit, start over. It'll be fine. But you really, if you put it in the oven at that point, you won't even get a satisfactory loaf out of it. It'll be dense. It won't be what you want it to be.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So this is the one I made last night. As you can see, we ate half of it. The fact that it's cut is somewhat hilarious because we're rippers, not cutters. I know that that's a pretty, what's the word I'm looking for?
Traditional
hard
labor.
Well, it's a hard divide, right? There are people who are firmly in the cutter camp and there are people firmly in the ripper camp, and they don't often make good house guests for each other, because the rippers are like, what are you doing cutting the bread, so formal, and the cutters are like, what are you putting your hands on the bread for, that's gross. We're rippers in my house, but by the time you get to day 2 and you're slicing it off for toast, then it's cut. So this is from the pans, the side of the pan, and you can see I get a little bit of rise here, and then you can see these are these large knobs that I left in the middle, and then if I just put them side by side, you can see how much bigger it gets.
And can we see the cross section?
And then that's the cross section. This one probably had a little bit of an issue. You can see right here it's a little dense at the bottom. But the top has a nice rise. And this is probably just a function of the temperature in my kitchen.
How does it look when you rip it?
So this is going to come apart pretty much on that's the braid mark. And if I pulled it here, you'll get, and you see there's some nice crumb in there. Hold that up a little closer.
You want to taste that for us?
Buttery.
Why does so many, well, not so many, but why do some challahs taste like cotton the next day? Like they taste great the day of, and then the next day they're like cotton.
Okay, so here's the great secret about bread. All bread is great out of the oven. Toasted cardboard out of the oven is fabulous. However, after a day or two, you're going to know whether or not it was good bread. So that's really what you're tasting there. Like it hot and fresh out of the oven. I used to run a program in Israel, and one of the things we used to do with teenagers is we would do make your own pita dough, and we would just make up like big batches of like very simple dough, just like water, yeast, flour, no real flavor to it. And then the kids could like play with it like Play-Doh, and then they would like stretch it out and they'd throw it on a big griddle. And they were all like, oh my God, this is amazing. But if you took one of those 2 hours later and tried to eat it, it was like eating cardboard. It was awful. So that's really what it comes down to. If you're having a bad bake, you'll know the next morning. And if it feels like dry, that's probably just not enough fat in it. Because that's what gives you that mouthfeel. What else can I tell people?
Do you have an opinion on the dry yeast versus size?
Oh, dry yeast versus wet yeast? I use dry yeast. In the baking industry, they typically use wet live yeast. I think it's whatever you're comfortable with. And, again, try to be as consistent as you can time to time, because that way you can start to run down where your gremlins are. It's like, cooking is art, baking is science. And in science, you want to, have a repeatable experiment, and that way you can sort of figure out what you're doing. Bread baking is science with a living organism, which makes it slightly a little more forgiving, but B, a little more complicated.
Gordon, did you give us an estimate for time on the bake?
So I run half an hour in 2 chunks of 15 minutes. So I do a 15 minutes in the pan, then I pull it out, I take it out of the pan, I put it back right on the rack for another 15 minutes.
You certainly are a jack of all trades. You know a lot about so many things.
I know, I have what did my college roommate say? A veritable treasure trove of useless and largely untested knowledge.
Well, I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So now, hold on. There's one last thing. If you have leftovers, we found ourselves with an enormous amount of leftover challah. My wife runs a preschool, and then they last Shabbat got canceled because of the smoke. So she brought all this challah home. So then what you can do is make some bread pudding. So we now have bread pudding, I think, for a week here. This has apples, nuts, caramel sauce in it. It smells fabulous. Eventually, this is going to get some bourbon sauce on top of it. So
can you zoom in on that so we can see it better?
There you go.
We still can't see it.
Peter, switch the camera view. Spotlight the other camera, maybe. There we go. There you go. And this is like a 9x13 pan full of bread pudding. So.
Wait, is that the finished bread pudding, or is that the bread before you make the pudding?
This is finished. This is just out of the oven.
Oh, because the bread pudding I've seen usually has had the bread more submerged. You know what I mean? It's been more, it hasn't had as much texture to
Right.
I think
individual
there's more
pieces.
bread underneath we're not seeing.
Yeah, so there's, let's see.
There it is.
When
Yeah,
you add
it's
all that sauce,
top
it'll make
crisps
it
Yeah.
up.
nice and wet.
Yeah, so
It's
there's sort of like a crouton layer, and then everything underneath it is gooey and sticky and nuts and sugar and cream and eggs.
You can always pour more milk on top, put it in the fridge,
Right.
make it again.
Yeah, hard sauce. You put hard sauce on it. So this is my wife's project, and I know she's got a bourbon sauce that's going to go over this because she asked me if we had bourbon. And I said, no, but I have American whiskey.
Close.
Right. Yeah, it's not from Kentucky, but it's close. So
You'll let us know how it tastes.
it smells delicious.
Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah,
would you like to give us some tips on bread pudding?
Use your leftover challah.
Yeah, use your leftover challah. That's exactly the answer.
Okay.
I don't have many more. I mean, I think bread pudding is one of those. I like it's a simple custard, and then it's just a question of let it soak and get your flavor profile. What you like. Is it cinnamon? Is it something else? You could make a savory bread pudding.
I was just going to ask you if you've made savory bread pudding. I've seen recipes for those.
I have not, because usually I'm sort of at that point thinking I could just make a Spanish frittata, a Spanish tortilla, and then it would be lower carb. But
Gordon, we're gonna duck out. We haven't done our tashlik yet, so we're gonna go do that.
Okay, yeah, you gotta do that before the sun goes down.
So thank you. It was wonderful. Shana Tova to everybody.
Shana
and
Tova.
See you next
Thank you all
week.
for coming.
So
we'll hopefully do this in person.
Yeah. All right. So I'm just gonna pop the recipe back into the chat here.
I noticed something strange where it loaded very slowly. So let's just leave it up for a minute before we end the meeting.
Right.
Thank you.
You're very welcome, everybody. Oh, I just sent that to one person. Ha ha ha. I'm silly.
If you go up to the top of the chat, it's still there.
Yeah.
It attaches to this software, not to like a cloud.
Yeah, I just think that if you came in after I put it in the chat, you might not be able to see it.
And if you want, I can share it.
Gordon?
Yes, sir.
I have a question. All the big cities in the United States, East Coast and Los Angeles out here, have mastered rye bread, corn rye bread, which is the bread makes the sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't been able to master it in San Francisco perfectly. There's a few places that got close.
Right.
Do you make rye bread?
I don't. Rye bread is really, really difficult. And it is difficult because of the rye flour. Rye flour is like whole wheat flour in as much as the husk of the rye slices through the gluten strands. So the result is, instead of getting that sort of nice, right, like if you think about something like a nice French bread, right, and it's got that really nice crumb to it, and you can really see the air bubbles, and it has a lightness to it. When you make things like pumpernickel, rye, and whole wheat bread, the particulate matter in the wheat germ or the wheat husk and in the rye husk slices through those protein chains, and it collapses the bread. So it becomes very, very difficult to make it well. And that's the challenge. I can't remember which of Michael Pollan's books it is. There's one in there. There's an entire chapter on him learning to make whole wheat bread. And he talks at great length about this. But also, if you pick up like Cook's Illustrated, they also talk a lot about how you're sort of fighting the mechanics of the bread. So I think that's why you're not getting, I mean, it's hard. And, there's certain things that I've learned. It's easier not to make it at home. Like, you could do it once. Like, I made hot dogs once at home, and I made liverwurst. And what I discovered is it's a pain in the tuchus. It's really hard. It's really easy to screw up. And there's no need to repeat that experiment. Although kosher liverwurst was a fun thing to try and puzzle through. If you're into liverwurst, I am.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm going to sign off. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. You're very welcome. Shana Tova. So I'll let people go. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
A great week, and if nothing else, we'll see everybody at Yom Kippur.
Yeah, see you on Friday.
Right, Shabbat on Friday. All sorts of things going on. So
thank you, Gordon.
Yeah,
Making
great seeing everybody. Yeah, and thanks for coming to my kitchen. I even cleaned it a little bit.
Is he going to put the recipe up?
Oh, sure.
Did it not load? I thought maybe it's my problem. Oh, look at that. So you can just take a screenshot of that if you like.
Exactly what I'm doing.
All right. Or you can just take your phone out and.
Can you see the full ingredient list, or is there a block?
Yeah, I can see the whole thing.
Okay. There's a second page.
Oh,
yes.
Thank you for telling me.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Okay. No,
I don't think I have this page.
And this braiding thing, I took off the internet. There are a lot of them. And nothing special there. Yeah, I think I've revised this recipe like 6 or 7 times since I first wrote it down. Every couple of years I go back to it. Somebody, says, "Oh, you do a challah demo?" I'm sure, and then I read the recipe. I'm like, I don't do it like this anymore. I gotta rewrite this.
I'm going to share it with you, my mother's recipe, because my father was a chemist and he took the recipe and he organized it, in the in the steps.
Oh, I was like by the periodic table.
Scientific method. Okay.
There you go.
But yesterday my cousins were all on Facebook talking about Sophia's challah, which Sophia called Rebecca's challah. So she must have got it from somebody else. Just have to do it. That's my thing about it.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. The more times you do it, the better you get at it. Like anything in life, right? 10,000 hours. Isn't that what they said?
Well, yeah, and this past 6 months has offered a little bit more time
to contemplate. Yes.
Now I'm going to sit down and count the hours.
Right.
I have